All right, so we're going to begin our study of aesthetic theory with a little survey of the history of aesthetic theory. In order to do that, the traditional place to start is by looking at the Greeks, particularly Plato. But in order to understand Plato's ideas about aesthetics, about beauty, about art, about all these things, we have to understand something about the nature of his philosophy generally. So what I want to do right now is tell you a little about how to approach Platonic theory, certainly the way in which Beardsley is approaching it, and use that so we can begin to get into the nitty-gritty of what he means by the censorship of art and what's behind that. All right. Anyway, Plato is what we call in the business of philosophy a classical idealist. What's that mean? Well, let me tell you what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean what people commonly take it to mean, of some sort of naive optimism or pie-in-the-sky dreaming about things. I suppose there's something that you could associate with it that way, but that's not technically what it means. Technically, a classical idealist, such as Plato, is one who holds that ideas are more real than the objects which manifest them. So, what is it that's real about a chair? Well, actually, the reality of the chair is its chairness, and the chairness isn't the physical part of it. It's not the wood or the metal or or any of these sorts of things. It's the idea of the chair. It's the chairness itself. It's a rather abstract concept, but this is what it's referring to. Now, in addition to this, when we say that it's the ideas that are more real than the objects that manifest them, we got to be clear about what is meant by idea. The word idea, derived from the Greek word ide, is not an idea that's private to your own thinking. It's not an idea that you hold in your head, at least not the way Plato's talking about it. When Plato talks about ideas, he's talking about a universal condition or principle that allows for the possibility of something being at all. And in this respect, the idea is more akin to, say, a blueprint for a building, right? I mean, it's if you ask what it is that makes the building you're in right now what it is. Is it the wood? Is it the metal? Is it the plastic? Is it the concrete? Whatever it is it happens to be built of. Well, all these things are part of it. But it's the arrangement of that. And in particular, it's the principle of the arrangement, what you find in the blueprints, right? Well, this is something of what Plato's notion of ideas are like. They're the underlying formal conditions, the principles that make it possible for the thing to be the way it is. And in this respect, it's not something that is yours or mine any more than, say, 2 plus 2 equals 4 is yours or mine. Rather, it's something that's a principle that's part of the universe, almost like a wallpaper of the cosmos, that allows things to be the way they are, to exist the way they are. Another thing about these ideas, in addition to being universal as opposed to individual, they're also eternal. And what I mean by that is that they have no beginning and no ending. Nobody came up with this idea or created this idea. Rather, these are, again, just part of the nature of things that allow the world to be the way it is. And yet, it is in these ideas or through these ideas that we find the truth or the identity of the thing. And this is why Plato gets so keen on trying to pay attention to the nature of ideals, what makes him an idealist. It is by engaging with the ideas, apprehending them, understanding them, reaching them on their own terms, and communing with them that we come to know what it is for a thing to actually be a thing. Now, in this respect, there's something else you have to keep in mind, which is that when Plato talks about how you do this in the various dialogues that he has, and he writes in a lot of different ways about this. His ideas change throughout his life on these things. But basically, his ideas tend to proceed in a way where he sees us apprehending these ideas in terms of reason. And really, and I mean a very rigorous reason, almost a mathematical reason, the way in which you arrive at proofs in geometry, which seems to be the basic model that he's got for knowing here. So, if you want to understand what a thing is, the way in which you come to understand it is by coming into a, shall we say, authentic or a legitimate engagement with the idea, the basic principle that allows that thing to be what it is, whether it's a person or a physical object or an event or a set of circumstances. Anything has to be understood in these idealistic terms if it's going to be understood rightly at all. Now this is going to lead to something else as far as our purposes go. This obviously has huge implications in all sorts of philosophy, and if you want to read more about Plato or talk more about Plato, we can sometime. But as far as a study of aesthetics goes, it's this. As much as Plato is an idealist and sees this approach to the ideal, to the idea that allows the conditions for things to be such as they are, as the basic reality behind it, so it is that he distrusts the senses. He distrusts the physical world. And he distrusts it for a few reasons. First of all, what we see and what we encounter in the physical world is always changing. There's no way in which it is one thing. It's going from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. Things in the physical world are what they are by virtue of moving, by virtue of changing, by virtue of acting. And this, to some extent, for Plato, is a kind of obscuration, if you like, of what the thing actually is. I mean, after all, if the way in which you come to know something is by touching it or seeing it or hearing it, and what you see is going from one point to the next point, to the next point, to the next point, to the next point, what is it that you actually know about that thing? Well, it's very hard to say that you know anything because all you've observed is a series of changes with no continual reference to it, no common thing to appeal to with it. This leads actually to second point, probably even more important for our purposes, about Plato's distrust of the physical world. It might not even be so much the physical world that he distrusts, it's the way in which we understand the physical world, the way in which we engage it. Because how do we engage it? We engage it through our senses. We engage it through sense experience, through, in Greek, our aesthesis, hence the word aesthetics. And here's the problem with that. Knowing things through your senses is really no way to know them at all for Plato. And the reason why it's no way to know them at all is because there's no way in which the reason, the authentic way of engaging with this idea, is disclosed. If the way I know something is just because I see it, or hear it, or taste, or touch, or smell it, what is it that actually gives me access to those conditions behind it? Nothing. All I'm having is a reaction, right? All I'm having is some sort of engagement with the thing just as it is. I know nothing about it. And this gets pretty dangerous for Plato because it's here, it's in the senses, and the passions that give rise to these senses. That's where you start to get trouble. That's where you get to places where the masses can be moved by powerful speeches or lovely works of music. Most notably for Plato, it's through the poets. These poets are the most dangerous ones because it's the poets that have these insights, that seem to be able to have some sort of replication of this truth through words. But do they understand it? Do they know where it comes from? Do they know its nature? No, they don't. They put it forward and they are, this might be a little much with it, but they are like a child with a very, very dangerous weapon. They don't have any sense of how it's supposed to work because they don't understand the underlying conditions for it. They don't know the truth of it. They only know of the truth of it. And this needs to be taken care of. This needs to be addressed because it's wrapped up in the world of senses. So this is some of what we have with Plato.